but it's not the first one, but it's the first one that people think of now, okay? St. Mark's Catholic Church in Shakopee was organized in 1856. So it's one of the earliest Catholic churches in Scott County. It was organized primarily as a German and Irish settlers or colonists. I say the Irish one, but really that was not that much. They moved. But anyway, it was mostly German. And they basically spoke German in the church all the time, too. Once the Dakota were forced, they had to sign a treaty in 1851. So it was after that time, so 1856 that this started. The first Catholic cemetery was Calvary Cemetery, which started in 56, I should say, 56. Okay, and then it deeded to St. Mark's in 1859. So you know where the Calvary Cemetery is located? Do you know where Canterbury is? There's a go just up the hill, and it's right there. It used to be a lot more, and there were a lot more plots there, but also cemetery bodies. But now it's kind of moved. There's just a small area that's done. Once they used that for a long time, and then they moved to here. And that one is not, you can't use that now. It's the old one, except for cemetery tours. That's about it. And of course, that is the Calvary Cemetery is the one that people say is the haunted one in Shakopee. There's even a book about it, so then you know it's got to be. I'm not so sure, but ever since I've given a presentation there, one or two people who are here in the group will tell a story that happened afterwards. They believe it too, so I'm just letting you know. I'm not worried, but whatever. Okay, but in 1877, Reverend Alois Plutz asked the men, I should say. He didn't ask the women, but he asked the men of the parish to get some more land for a cemetery for the people. And so they purchased 27.5 acres of land. Where did they get it from? The nuns. They had this land, this whole area here, okay? They had, it was a Benedictine community. They also operated St. Gertrude's Academy in Shakopee, which was a school for women, girls, okay? But they also had an orphan farm in Section 12, Part T, whatever, but basically it's this place, and they purchased this for the cemetery. Okay, so there's the Plutz, which we'll talk about more, and then some of the nuns that were around, and there's a lot of them. By the way, they ended up moving to St. Joseph, Minnesota, and became what? I didn't hear what you said. Yes. So had they stayed here, we would have had a college place right here. But no, they moved, and there's a whole story about that. We'll talk about that a little bit later, okay? So here, the graves were laid in kind of a formal way. They're different plots. They're like semicircular path between the burial plots. They said it was kind of like the European garden of the time. But as you can see, you don't see, it looks like this. And if you look now, it doesn't look like anything like this, right? Because they used to have it, so it was all, but then of course that before they had cars and everything, so it switched. So it's just good to know related to that. Now the problem is then trying to find where somebody is. In fact, you have the list of the ones that we're talking about today. The last three, we just know that it's down over there somewhere, but I can't find them. So if anybody does know them, that's better. Then we'll find out. But you have to basically, they're underground, so you have to like dig to find it. So we do know, and here's the thing, the English speakers at St. Mark's decided that uh, when the priest would give a homily or whatever, it was always in German. Okay, so the people who were the English speakers, which are mostly the Irish people, they decided to switch and have St. Mary's Parish. That was organized in 1864. Okay, so it's just kind of interesting because if you look at where the location, St. Mark's and the school was over there, 3 or 4 blocks away was St. Mary's. But they're really rivals. I mean, for all kinds of things. I just know that kind of thing. But what's also interesting is that when this became the burial grounds, up to 1835, the St. Mary's people also were buried here. Okay, but in 1935, they decided to add over there, which was St. Mary's. So this was St. Mark's, that's St. Mary's. There's some mixture that happens. But there used to be a big fence along there. So, the St. Mary's were over there and St. Mark's over there. They didn't want to be together, right? It's kind of fun. In fact, it was not until 1978 that the two churches agreed to combine the two cemeteries. And so now it's called the Catholic Cemetery, which of course it says on the sign over there. So, but for the most part, if you really look around, the people over there tend to be St. Mary's, here is St. Mark's for the most part. It's just kind of weird, but like for example, there's a priest who's from St. Mary's, he's buried over there. But the other people, the other priests are over here. So it's just kind of interesting, okay? And so we're going to speak and talk about someone. So I always like to talk about this one, the Spearman family. This one right here. And I like them, and specifically we're going to talk about Johanna O'Brien Spearman. She was born probably 1830 and died in 1890. Why do we remember them? There's 3 in this little thing here. It was the murders that happened at 8th and Spencer in Shakopee. Okay, you look for your location. I know it was like a kitty corner, but close. We were on 7th and Main Street, right? But wasn't too far. It was where the murders were there. And 3 people were killed. I'll tell you a little bit about the family. Okay. Johanna O'Brien was born in Ireland, probably around 1830. She arrived in Boston on May 24th, 1848. The ship was the brig Lively. Okay. Now, meanwhile, John Spearman was also born in Ireland and moved in the 1840s. He moved to Canada and then Minnesota. So John and Johanna married in America. So here's a picture of them with the first 3 children. They had 10 children, by the way. That was a good Catholic family, right? So in 1854, the Spearmans settled in Chanhassen. It was on 92 acres of land besides Lake Riley, okay? They were John and Johanna were Catholic. They attend both St. Mark's and St. Mary's in Shakopee. So they went back and forth. Okay. But we do know that in St. Mary's, Johanna was baptized in 1872. Okay. They had 11 children. I said 10 before, but it's 11. Okay. They had Anne, John, Ellen, Bridget, Mary, Catherine, Jenny, William, Margaret, Peter, and John. The last two, Peter and John, both died in childhood. Okay. But they were in Chanhassen and they were doing well as farmers. Okay. In July of 1860, they did an agricultural census, and they said they have 8 acres of improved land and 84 acres of unimproved land. The cash value of the farm was about $500, and the implement stuff was $30. Okay. They had 3 cows, 2 oxen, 4 other cattle, 6 swine. So the value of their livestock was $160. They also had Indian corn in bushels, 160 of them. They had Irish potatoes. They had butter and hay. And of course, the value of the animals slaughtered was $40. Okay, so they were doing well. But then, that's in Chanhassen. But in October 1st, 1877, John and Johanna purchased block number 106, lot 1 through 10 in Shakopee. They paid $1,200 for the whole block. Now, at that time, there was nothing there. There were no homes at that point. In 1877, the whole area was just a farm. So in the very middle was their house. So that's kind of just an interesting thing, because now you think about there's houses all over there, right? Okay. But that's after the death. Okay. They built a farmhouse. It was 1.5 acres high. They considered it at the edge of town. So in other words, it was it, and after that was just probably farmed all the way through, right? The house had a kitchen, parlor, 2 bedrooms, and a back porch. It was centered in the middle of the block. And on the homestead, they had a barn and a chicken coop. Okay. Now, they said in 1890, they had 1 cow, some hens, and a cat. Now, that cat is going to be important, so we don't want to forget the cat, okay? They said that John, who at this time, he was basically the grandfather there. He used to walk his cow from the street there in Spencer Street, walked all the way down to the Minnesota River daily to be watered, and then brought it back every time, okay? They were retired people, they were quiet people, they kept to themselves. They had clothing that was not very styling at all, okay? They said Johanna was seen in public on Sundays when she attended St. Mary's, okay? The couple were described as industrious, economically, and miserly, miserly. Thank you. Okay. They said he paid for all of his purchase in cash. Okay. That's actually, they were very smart when you really think about it, but okay. So they had these 11 kids, except 2 died, so there's 9 around, right? So Anne Spearling Russell Lynch, the oldest daughter, was widowed in 1880. So she left California, returned to Shakopee with her three children, and stayed with the parents, okay, on Spencer Street, okay. The youngest one was Georgie, okay. He was 2 years old, and the grandparents loved him. So when Anne decided to move to Minneapolis and marry again, George said, the parents said, or grandparents said, Liv, Georgie is going to stay with us. And they did, okay? So that worked out now because there's a kid and the grandparents. But that worked really well because they couldn't read or write, but he could. So Georgie could help with that kind of stuff. He helped with the horses around the farm. He helped with correspondence since the parents were illiterate. And this is an important thing, George was an altar boy, okay? And he was at St. Mary's. One Sunday in September, the family was not at Mass. Uh-oh. And this is actually what the St. Mary's look at that time, it's changed quite a bit since then, but it's just kind of interesting. So he wasn't there. So the church members decided after church, not during church, they went to the house. They looked in the window. John Spearman was sitting in front of the kitchen stove with a bullet in the back of his head. They continued to look. Johanna O'Brien Spencer was lying in a pool of blood on the parlor floor. George, who was 12 years old at that time, lay dead beneath a bed upstairs. What happened, right? They said nothing was touched. There were 2 certificates of deposit on the table. It was clearly not a robbery. They knew that the murder happened several days ago. Why? Remember the cat? The famished cat had eaten several of the grandparents' fingers. You have to include that because it was in the newspaper. I was like, oh my God, that's so gross. They said the chickens had starved to death. The cow was so weak that it had to be killed. So the question becomes, well, who did this? This was in 1890, okay? So we do know that there are 6 possible. This was like in newspapers here as well as in Minnesota. Lots of information about this family because they couldn't figure out who actually killed these people, okay? And they find that there were 6 possible. After interviewing, like they interviewed everybody, they had actually, one person was actually, or several didn't speak English and they had translators. The whole thing trying to figure out. We know that the city of Shakopee offered a $1,000 reward for capturing the guilty parties. There was an inquest taken. Several people were testified about the murder. All the people that were listed that were interviewed, everybody anywhere around the place, okay? They also interviewed people who were just around the town. It was almost like a not a fun thing, but it was really kind of fun. Everybody wanted to be in the thing and be interviewed. And you could go and find every little interview that people did and talked about and stuff like that. Okay, so here's the 6 people. First one that is possible is William Spearman, okay? In a testimony by B.H. Pont, he said that William Spearman was going to the M&SL Railroad in Minneapolis on the late train on the 13th of December. They know that William had separated from his wife, Cora, Okay. He was working as a hack driver for a livery stable. He had a reputation as being a heavy drinker. He was known about town as Whiskey Bill. I think he might be the one. All right. His parents called him lazy. Okay. What's also interesting that his wife, Cora, would return to William several times during sobriety, and then they would be living separately. And they'd go back together, back and forth, back and forth. Finally divorced in 1895. And William died March 3rd, 1907. He was age 40, and it was from drunk alcohol. So that's a possibility. My own opinion, that's the one I believe, but I don't know. Second person, Joseph. No last time. Anna, the oldest daughter, okay, she consulted Mrs. Woods, who was the clerk. What is the word? He'd like go. Who's like remember the dead? Can remember things. What do you call it? Clairvoyant. Yes, that's. Thank you. Okay, so they saw that, so she went and asked them, and the person there said it was a man named Joseph who did the deed. Joseph, according to the thing, had a badly mutilated finger on one hand, and the deed was done with a .38 Survivor rifle on the left hand. And Mrs. Woods predicted that the murder would be solved on March of 1891. It wasn't. So I'm just letting you know. So that's the one person. The next third one they bring is Mr. Farr. Myrtle, which is the granddaughter, remembered that a young man used to help around the house on a farm in Spokane, Washington, where he was at. He would come by, visit with Myrtle and his husband, Sid. Myrtle just didn't like that guy when he was around. He would watch Myrtle and stare so intensely. Finally, she remembered. She remembered that he was a handyman for his family and for her grandparents, John and Johann Spearman. When Myrtle confronted him about it, he acted funny, and then he was gone from the neighborhood. His last name was Farr. So that's one possibility. All right. The next one is O.S. Brown. You know the Brown family here in Shakopee? Tie-in. Just let you know. That's just kind of interesting because Dave Brown was in my class in school. But I just know that they're all related because they talk about other things, not tied into this one. But they said O.S. Brown was called Red Brown. Can you guess why? Red hair. Yep. Okay. He lived across the street from the Spearmans. Okay. And they said William Spearman noted that Red Brown got some wood for a fence from John Spearman, and he never paid it back. They had some words, and Brown called John Spearman a son of a bitch. According to William Spearman, O.S. Brown said he would kill Spearman, or something like that. I love how that something like that. They put it in quotes, so you wonder what it is. All right, the next one possibility: two men, one who wore a buffalo coat. There was a person, William Holland, who was sworn by the two people into the court. Said two men drove past his house fast towards Shakopee. One had a buffalo overcoat on, and the other one had an overcoat, but I'm not sure if it was fur coat or not. They were intoxicated. They had very good horses. This happened on Sunday morning, December 14th, 1890, between 6 and 7 a.m. The thing we want to remember about that is William Spearman had a buffalo coat and a black hat. And the last possible a person that they're talking about is a man dressed up as a woman. Okay, Mary Carr, who was a servant at the Wilder house here, was walking from his mother house to the Walders at 9:30 p.m. She met a person, between the church, St. Mark's, I think probably, and the priest's residence. He was dressed in woman's clothing, but looked like a man. He walked fast to her left, going in the opposite direction. The dress, shawl, and hat was black. It was a clear night. He was a slender person with a very heavy step. Mary Carr could hear the footsteps. Which do you think did it? That's a big question, right? So again, we have this thing. We have William, we have Joseph, Mr. Farr, O.S. Red Brown, two men with an overcoat and a buffalo robe, and a man dressed as a woman. All are possibilities. So meanwhile, here in Shakopee, they had a triple funeral of John Spearman, Johanna O'Brien Spearman, and George Russell. It was held at St. Mary's on December 19th, 1890. They're buried here at the Catholic Cemetery. It's also interesting because there's actually no death certificate found at all. And they said it may be that the certificates were overlooked because of so much excitement that was going on in Shakopee. Now, who did it? The murders of John, Johanna, and George was never solved. So now we're going to believe it. I don't know. We don't know the answer to that, except that that's what we know about them. But it's very interesting because of the song. So you see this all the time. You're like, oh, wow. But then to realize what was going on, it makes it quite interesting. So I don't know. They didn't have DNA or anything like that, so there's no really help with that. I believe that Bill, the one of the children, did it. Is kind of the one who was kind of drunk a lot, but that's just my guess too. I did read through all the stuff, and it's fascinating, and it's fun because some of them they speak German, and they had to have an translator. They had all these different things trying to figure out, but they never really found out. So that's the Spearman family. Okay, now we're heading Juliana Pink Schmidt. I think the Schmidt that's across the street from you is related to this thing. Yeah. Okay. All right. Juliana Pink was born in 1834 in Germany. She was the sixth of 7 children of Henrik Pink and Marie Barbara Sosong, I should say. She was baptized in 1835. She married George Werner Pink, Schmidt, I should say, in 1856. They had, guess how many children?
10.
Yes, you're right. You can always guess it's got to be around that because, it's a Catholic cemetery. It should be around then if they did it right. Okay. They're actually named, it's like John Werner, Jacob, Christian, Catherine, Margaret, George, Charlie, Peter, Elizabeth, and Henry. It's funny names, they're all about the same kind of thing too. Okay. So 8 years after their marriage, Juliana, who was 28 years old, is that the thing that's doing that? Noise? Wow. Okay. She was 28 years old. George was 43 years old. And they had their four children at that time. They moved to America in 1864 on the ship Magellan. Okay, anyway. It's kind of weird because it took 28 days to get to America. They were in a cargo ship. So the lower deck was for cargo only. The top deck was open for the air. So they had a kind of an extra place that was built that was about 5.5 feet below the top deck. They also knew that it had no toilets or washing facilities or proper ventilation. So I don't know. They just didn't hold. They hold it in for 28 years. All right. They said the passengers had to provide their own food. There's no refrigerator. Their main hazard of crossing the ocean was seasickness, storms, fire, disease from the area, and unsanitary conditions. So where did they go to the bathroom? Over the edge? I know, don't you? I mean, it's funny but they had that information, so obviously it was passed along. Remember, this would happen, but nobody really, it should have been a little bit more specific. Because that's kind of weird. All right. So they moved to Chicago. After 2.5 years later, they moved to Minnesota. They settled on a 160-acre farmstead about 5 miles southeast of Shakopee in Eagle Creek, okay, which now is part of Shakopee. Juliana said this neighborhood was quite heavily timbered then, although there was some prairie on our land. We had to do a great deal of grubbing, and I did my share. It was hard work, and the food and the clothing was scarce, even for the babies. But we did our best, and I remember how pleased we were when we had 12 acres of cleared land. We used oxen, of course, but for several years we cut the hay by hand and carried in on poles. That was basically what they did. They marketed what little they raised in Shakopee and managed to get along. As the children grew up, we sent them to the little log school nearby. In summertime, they had help in the farm. So there were a lot of small schoolhouses in the area. Okay, so this is one. So this is just a picture of her with some of her children once they're older. Just, So in 1898, her husband had just finished stacking a group of things in the field. It was ascended to the ground when it was stricken and fell dead in his son's arm. Okay, so Juliana Pink was 68 years old. Oops, excuse me. Julie Schmidt, I should say, Pink Schmidt, has 68 great grandchildren, 143 great grandchildren. Of the 3 generations, there had been 9 sets of twins and 1 set of triplets. Wow, that's kind of interesting. Okay. 2 sets of twins were among her children, 2 more among her daughters, and 5 sets of triplets, and the triplets were with the grandchildren. So in other words, if you're a pink Schmidt, be careful, you'll have a lot of kids. Okay. She died um, at age 93 at midnight when she died. The funeral was at St. Mark's Catholic Church with Father Sobs officiated. She was buried at St. Mark's Cemetery, which is now part of the Catholic Cemetery. And she's very right in. I when I got it, I looked to the thing, but now I couldn't find it. But I could find this one, which is kind of the next gen or had before her. So switch that one. The next person we talk about is right here, is um, Peter Joseph Schmidt from 1818 to 1895, and there's actually a nice picture of him. I always kind of look, but when you can find pictures, it's much more interesting because then you can visualize the thing. He was born in Germany. He moved from Germany to the United States approximately 1874. Peter Joseph Schmidt married his second wife, Catherine Marie Melcher, okay, on November 30th, 1878 in Marystown. Peter was 60 years old. His wife, Catherine Melcher Schmidt, was 30. It was the first marriage for Catherine, the second one for Peter. Okay. It is interesting to know that his first marriage was with Anna Wagner. They had 10 children, although Sam died. When she died, then they had been together for 34 years. And of course, many men at that time couldn't cope with housekeeping, gardening, canning, and so on for running a house. So that's why he got married, okay? This was before the washing machine and ready to wear clothes. They didn't have such a thing. So they got married in Marystown. That's when Peter Joseph Schmidt married Catherine Marie Melcher. When they talked about Peter, according to there's a book called Our Family History, it said he had great courage and adaptability. He was uneducated, from a simple farm background, but he required a big estate. Okay. He was always able to handle hardship, always able to carry on and deal with the world as they found. They had 6 children. So the first family, 10, this is next 6 of them. Of those 6 children, George died after 19 days. Peter died of tuberculosis at age 28. Catherine was born deaf and died at 44. Margaret, who died of diphtheria at age 7. Juliana, also born deaf. She died at 83. And Theodore, or Ted Schmidt, who died in 1935. And they had 13 children, including Elizabeth Schmidt Doles, which we all remember was a big person with family tree stuff here in Shakopee. Peter lived till 77 years old. He put his affairs in order and died on February 13th. He was buried at the Catholic Cemetery. Now, Catherine was a widow with young children. Her only income came from crop shares and rent from her property. So she really believed that you follow the maxim of widows to live off the interest and preserve the principal. So he was a widow. She was a widow for almost 40 years, and of course she did well. They said one person, Virginia Toots Schmidt Doble, said, "Our grandmother Schmidt lived 3 blocks from the south of our house at 212 Atwood Street. And we'd also go for various reasons, we'd go and see her. She would always had a big piece of homemade bread with both butter and jam on it, ready for me. We could go into the cellar and bring up the crockery jars of homemade jam and sprinkle that to keep them spoiled." They said Catherine actually did not talk a lot because she could not speak English very well. But we'd go into her attic, which was huge, to play and pretend all kinds of things. She always had a big garden with apple and plum trees. In the barn, which she had raised chicken, which were pure white and pure black kittens. They remember they used to really wanted a cat in their house, so they found one from there. They tried to sneak it back to their house in the cornflakes box, but Mom would quickly tell them to take it back. So Catherine was born or died at age 82. And in the newspaper, it said she was a good mother in all that the world implies. A patient woman, Miss Schmidt knew much about life's hardship. She was a kindly woman regarded by those who associated with her. Okay? Now, well, we'll just stay here to go for the next one, which is Tanner Ellen Wickapa Zita Alberts, born in 1977, died in 2011. He was born in Bismarck, North Dakota. His parents were Richard Allen Alberts and Donna Walking Elk Fulton Alberts. Tanner loved his family very much. His sisters and his brothers were all very important for him. He was a gifted athlete. He was really good at basketball. He was a member of the United Tribes basketball team. When he moved to Minnesota, Tanner joined the Midnight Express drum group, where he was a talented drummer. The powwow drum group that he joined was the Twin Cities, part of the Twin Cities area. It was mostly the people of the Ojibwa Nation, but they also did all things talking about the fair people from the past. Their singing and dancing was driven by the drums. He was also spent a lot of time with his 2 sons, Manuel and Tanner Albert Jr. in Shakopee. When he was 31 years old, Tanner started struggling with stomach cancer. After 1.5 years later, he died at St. Francis Regional Medical Center on February 2nd, 2011. He was 33 years old. The funeral was at the Teotihuacan Spiritual Center in Shakopee, and is buried here on 10th Avenue in Shakopee. So that's Tanner A. Alberts from February 12, 1977 to February 7th, 2011, I should say. And so you just see that there. I'm going to stay here for this next one too because it's kind of the same area. Lorraine Amelia Libby Carla, 1913 to 2009. Lorraine Amelia Libby was born in St. Paul. Um, she was a graduate of St. Catherine's College. She earned degrees in English and art. She earned her living. She went to Mankato State University. She taught many years as an elementary school teacher and later as an art teacher. And guess what? She married Julius A. Collar II. Okay, and I think I have a book here somewhere. Yeah. Okay. All right. Would you look on the back of your program, your thing? We'll see if this works because I don't know if it is. Does anybody have a star on any of them? All right. Well, you don't. Could be because it didn't arrive or whatever. This is the book about the city of Shakopee up to 1960. Okay. Vinny, you get this one. So you're the youngest one here. So here, come get it. It's your reading assignment. It's actually kind of interesting stories in there. But anyway, they got married. The house is on Lewis Street in Shakopee, 434 Lewis Street. And if you ever see this beautiful house, someone else has it now, and it's really beautiful inside. It's interesting. Lorraine never took an art class, but found her natural talent in many forms. She had a strong religious influence. In 1947, she was at home battling a severe ear infection. Her father gave him a large tablet and a set of charcoals. Despite not having any formal training, her drawing had form, proportion, and balance. And if you look at that book there's pictures in there that drawn, it's all by her, for her husband, for that book, okay? He did a lot of things. He illustrated the cover and the illustrations for the Shakopee story and the St. Mark's Centennial, okay? She taught in schools in Chaska, Savage, and Chaska, and also adult education classes. On March 1st, 2009, she passed away at the age of 96. Her husband died before that, but she was survived by her children, Fred, Jed, Lorraine, Boyd, Cece, 12 grandchildren, and 14 great-grandchildren. All right. So in terms of where the things are and how they're done, it's fun to look at like what they have here. A lot of this is a variety of things, but like look at this big one right over there, which is coming up next. I mean, you know, it's big. Big out's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay, the family. I think probably tied into gambling, but that's just my opinion on that one. But anyway, it's just, but all of them, you know, the look at the different one and what's there and how and what they have, it makes it kind of interesting. We do cemetery cleaning. We've been doing it at Belly Cemetery for 4 years now. We're almost finished with that one. I think within a month, it's going to move to this place for the next one. Because see some of the places there's stuff on it, you know, and so you got to clean that off, otherwise it will just rot the whole thing. So that's our plan, is to move to this one and they'll be in this one for probably 4 years probably, and then we'll move to the next one. I do think that we also, you do a lot at the Marystown cleaning them, and it's beautiful the difference between them. It's a lot of work, but it's kind of fun because you sit and chat with people and talk about the people that hurt him dead, you know. So here's a good one. Is this one, which is this guy. Okay? I don't like him actually. He's a pain in the butt, and basically because I talked to Betty Dole's back when she was still alive, and she used to get so mad at this guy. But okay, Alois Plutz was the name. He was born in Austria. Okay, along with 16 other people, they moved to the United States, and Alois at age 23 was ordained at the cathedral in St. Paul in 1865. He became a priest in Stillwater, in New Prague, Winona, Cedar Lake, Sleepy Eye, New Elm, and Glencoe. But he's most tied in to Shakopee. That's why he's buried here, right here. All right. He traveled to other different missionaries. Um, they had no roads at that time, so it could be bitter wind, howling blizzard, pelting rain, mosquitoes. The heat of summer made it hard, but he was young and energetic, and he said he would do it no matter what. Okay. In June of 1876, he became pastor of the Church of St. Mark's in Shakopee, where he stayed for 10 years. There's actually a picture, and here's this new one, which is still there, or not really new, and there's a little one before them, which was there before them. So it's been around for a long time. Now, we have to remember this because this is in 1877 when he joins that. However, in Shakopee, starting in 1862, okay, the sisters from the Benedictine convent in Pennsylvania arrived here in Shakopee. The sisters, with approval, founded a convent and an academy, okay? This is really important because at that time there was no high school in Shakopee or anything like that. And so they decided they were going to have a school for girls in Shakopee. So the person in charge was Mother Gertrude Flynn, and it's called St. Gertrude's Convent and Academy. It was from 1862 to 1880. When they started it, the person from one of the priests said, "I found a little mission for the sisters to the great joy of the English and German Catholics." The new convent had its own story. First, it was a cowshed, then a horse barn, and now it's the beginning of the women's convent. Um, it serves basically good things. The sisters erected a large 2.5-story limestone building on the corner of 4th and Atwood Streets, south of St. Mark's Church. And this is what it looked like. I remember this when I was growing up before. Now it's tear down. So the St. Gertrude's Convent and Academy um, by the Sisters of St. Benedict opened on May 4th, 1866. There's actually pictures of some of the people who were nuns at that time that are here. By September 4th, 1871, the Academy had an enrollment of 46 young ladies. Okay, so in case you have any of your relatives here, quite interesting pictures. And you go through like the Scott County Historical Society and stuff, and it'll have the list of the people who are the nuns who are there, and then the people who actually work or were students here. And some of them it says some are students, some lived at home, so it just kind of depend on the thing. It's interesting because the board and tuition was $40. Bedding and laundry was $5. Piano lessons were $8. And guitar lessons were $3. Lessons in cloth, waxworks, and the making of paper flowers were extra. Okay? The the person in charge, I should say, was um, Mother Gertrude Flynn. What's also interesting that they had just started, remember, first time was in 1866. By 1878, the debt for the whole thing was paid off. That's amazing when you think about that, okay? So that comes back to this guy. Okay. Father Plutt decided in 1878 to refuse to re-employ the Benedictine sisters because they weren't able to teach German properly. Now, I think it's the difference between High German and Low German is really what was going on. Okay. But what we do know is that Father Plutt refused to give the nuns pews in the church. Oh my God. That was a big thing back then. You have a robe, that was yours. You paid for it, to be the thing then. And so they'd always have one for the nuns. He said, nope, he didn't do it. Shame on you. All right. That was really bad when you think about that. Okay. He said, they said Father Plutt, who was a pastor of St. Mark's, he did not support the sisters. And they had really like fight back and forth, back and forth. Finally, he said, you're gone. We're not going to support you anymore. And they got a different group of sisters from Notre Dame to replace them. And because of that, the Benedictine sisters had to move to St. Joseph, Minnesota. And Shakopee lost the academy. Okay? Now, of course, I'm sure they were very happy in St. Joseph and Collegeville too, probably, right? That happened, okay? So we do know that eventually that building that was downtown Shakopee became the Scott County Poorhouse. Okay, and then eventually it became the second hospital in Shakopee before it was tore down. Now it's a parking lot in St. Mark's Church. So there's a picture of what it looked like. I just remember it was I remember when it was for like old people for the most part. But before then, it was all these other things. But it's also because the person from St. John's Monastery says they believed they were wrong. And my own impression is that they were wrong. So they didn't like the thing also. Okay. Now, meanwhile, he ended up called to St. Paul in 1886. He went to different places till 1903. Then he came back to St. Mark's in Shakopee. Pope Pius X in 1906. And then after this, he became the most reverend Archbishop. Okay. But we know that his health wanes, and he died. He was the oldest priest in the Diocese of St. Paul, died at the age of 76 on February 20th, 1917. He's buried here. Okay. So we just mentioned this. So yes, he did some good things here too, right? But as Betty Dole says, I can't believe it. Because that was really a hard thing to have, especially women to actually have a school. And they were doing well. They did all that they needed to do. They also gave the land here for a cemetery. Anyway, that's the story of Monsignor Alois Club, who's buried here with the other ones. We all say that they're all fine, whatever. Over there is the Schoenberger from St. Mary's is over on the Catholic side. I mean the not
Mary's
Catholic,
side,
sorry.
yeah.
Thing. Remember there was a fence there. I remember the fence there. It was separate as two separate things. Anyway, we'll go back to the last one over here, which is the Reese family. It's Elizabeth K. Reese, 1874 to 1949. I have a story about her too. She became the first um, mayor in Shakopee who was a woman. Okay, there's only a couple after, or one after, I think. But what's interesting about her is when she was older, um, Nancy Schmidt, remember, who lived close to us, right? I asked her about her one time. She's like, she was so mean. I think what interesting to what she said. No, don't tell the whole world, but she was mean. I'm like, well, I'm going to tell them because that's kind of interesting how people view of it. Anyway, she was born on August 26, 1974 in Shakopee. Her father was Jacob Reese. Mother was Josephine Mamer Reese. They were in Luxembourg. They arrived in Minnesota in 1857. And her father started the Jacob Reese Bottling Works. So you know about that was in downtown, okay? Now Elizabeth became a nurse so she could take care of her mother because Joseph needed it. During the 1918 flu epidemic here, there was not enough nurses, and she gave her services night and day. The flu epidemic happened in Shakopee on October of 1918. 15 Shakopee County people and 12,000 Minnesotans died from the flu. Okay. It was called the Spanish flu because Spain, who was neutral during the war, was the first county to publicly report the cases. But it had nothing to do with that. But it was still called the Spanish flu. They know that there was Chinese, France, and the United States had already had many of them. But they told them, don't tell that in the newspaper. Which is funny. Okay. So one of the persons who, a local person, was John and Teresa Decker of Shakopee. Of Shakopee, and their newborn son. I'll talk more at the Marystown Cemetery School. Okay, but John and Teresa passed away within 12 hours of each other. John died first at 8:10 p.m. on Wednesday, October 30th, and Teresa died at 7 a.m. on October 31st. This was in 1918. What's weird about this is Teresa had just had a baby boy at 8 p.m. on Wednesday. The baby died right after. Okay. So Teresa passed away a few hours later without knowing that her husband also died. Okay. John was 38 years old. Teresa was 33 years old. They had 3 other children who were stuck with no mother and no father. Teresa's parents, George Fisher family, and the community helped with that. But it's interesting because they're buried here in St. Mark's Catholic Church. But like many churches, their remains was not taken inside the church because it was Spanish flu and everybody's worried about it, right? So they only just opened the door as they drove by in their horse and buggy, and they went by, and as they went by, they did a quick blessing and then shut the door. Because, watch out, they were worried about this, and then they had to bury it very quickly too. They said that friends were so concerned that they said their rosaries across the road from the family's home. They just didn't want to get close. They wanted to pay their respect, but they didn't know what was happening and were worried that they would get the flu. So Elizabeth Reese later became the first woman mayor in Shakopee. And of course, she had worked so much at the with the flu. And so again, there used to be which is the 1890s social club in downtown Shakopee. That building there, the Turtles part of that. That is used to be her restaurant there too. It's an interesting one because the tie-in is with at that time they, especially during the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there would be cars parked along the thing, right? And they were not like cars from Shakopee, like little Fords or whatever. They weren't. They were like nice cars. So what they realized is because they weren't from Shakopee, they're from the cities, and they were coming here. So the people would go and they'd look in the windows of the place, and no one would be there. Except one guy who was sitting there, was sitting over in the corner. What they found out is that if you go there, you go in, you talk to that guy. If he said okay, they go downstairs, and that's where they had the slot machine, the bar, all that kind of stuff was going on there the whole time. That's why I say that's why they have the nice stone there, because they got money, lots of money from that thing, because they were involved with that. That's probably why they got her for the mayor too, probably. But it was interesting because for a woman to having that, and she died the second. I mean, there was a second thing. She was again elected mayor again, and then she became the post office person after that. So very interesting. Now we're going to go all the way back to Heller, 1848 to 1903. There's a picture of him, but it's not the best. Look much like a Heller, but at least it's close, right? He was born in 1848 in Germany. When he was about 20 years old, he entered the military service. He served 3 years, not here and there, but back there, Germany. He was in the war between France and Germany from 1870 to 1871. After he finished his term in the army, he decided to turn his focus on the land across the seas. And in 1872, he crossed the Atlantic and came directly to Shakopee. I find it so interesting that people like pick a place from over there and then head here. How did they know it? There must be some relative or something here, I just find it interesting. Oh, here, this one does. It says they knew that the Hussman family were here in Shakopee already. So he came here, worked with the Husband family in the brewery here in Shakopee. The brewery is located on the West Shakopee along the railroad tracks, about 1/4 miles east of the Strunk Niesen Brewery. So we do know about this our family because for the next 20 years, members of the Husband family were in charge and produced 1,200 barrels of beer annually in 1870. It became one of the largest brewery in the state outside of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And of course, Herman was in employment there. In 1875, Herman married Anna Justina Weiner, and they moved to Marystown. Henry and Anna had 6 children. In 1878, they moved back to Shakopee. They said Herman was a hard worker, honest in his dealings, and most kindly jovial disposition. He enjoyed a large trade and won success in his business. So everything is going well, except that Anna died in 1888, and Herman was left with 6 children. Now again, so here's a picture of them early on with the first wife, of course, thing. So what would you do if that happens? You stuck with 6 kids, like,
Find a younger woman.
exactly what they did. Thank you. Everybody is being smart because that's exactly what they did. So in 1894, he married Catherine Katie Corner Doles. They took care of their 4 children with his first wife. 2 others had died young. And he became a brewery at the husband. And eventually he took over there and became Union Brewery. He continued the business until 1901 when he retired for this. There's actually glasses that called H.H. Heller Union. So if you have them, but they're all mostly, ask the Hellers, they've got them. A lot of them, right? That's cool. You asked them, oh yeah, I got it. I'm like, well, why don't you give at least a couple to we so we can show? No, we're saving them. Well, yeah, I know, but still. Anyway, but they do have, and there's a lot of stuff about them. So eventually he retires in 1901. He devoted his time looking over his farming interests. At the time of his illness, his health failed, and at age 55, he died at home in 1903 of kidney disease. Probably from other drinking. But anyway, this is my thinking. All right. His funeral was at St. Mark's Catholic Church in Shakopee. Father Alois Blood officiated, and he was buried here. It's just kind of an interesting thing. But we shouldn't be so bad about Father Pluck, because I don't know, he could have been great things, but I just like to add a little excitement to it anyway. All right, the next one is back over there, but we're going to just do it here, because the last one, right across the way, is that Maria Joseph Dickon Flecken. So her middle name is Joseph. See? So David would be great. Talking about one of my nieces. I'm like, that would be a great name. But they don't seem to think it's so great. I'm like, it could be. You just gotta start. Anyway, Josephina, I think her name actually on the thing is Josephina. Okay, was born in Germany. When she was 13 years old, her and her parents immigrated to America. She ended up in Shakopee. She married Herman at Flecken, I should say, at St. Mark's Catholic Church. She was 19 years old. Over the next 20 years, Maria and Adam had how many children? Nine. Who did 12? Who said 12? That's it. Oh, you got the book. He's already reading it. All right.
Off the book. That's cheating.
But I will say one thing, although several died as infants. Sorry. But it still counts. So, he was, Adam was employed on the Omaha machine shops for 3 years. Then he established a brickyard in Shakopee. Most think about the other one. He sold that brickyard, and then he ran the Occidental Hotel, which is on First Somerville Street in Shakopee. There's actually a picture of it. Down. The Occidental Hotel was built in 1874 on the northwest corner of First and Somerville Street. Okay. It was a two-story frame building with a large dining hall and a big parlor on the first floor, besides the kitchen and two sleeping rooms. The second story was divided into sleeping rooms. So they had two living rooms, male, female, husband. So they ran the hotel 1889 to 1914. They said it used to be a big thing because they used to have great food there, okay? And eventually when they stopped that, they continued it as a rooming house. It was closed down in 1931, and then finally the building itself was torn down in 1963. But there's with their kids and family. So she died in 1924. She was 74 years old, buried at the Catholic cemetery. Then eventually Adam, who was he was in the Civil War, actually also, he died. He was 90 years old. And they're just right back over there. Now the last one, we're going to just stay here instead of saying, but where we started, remember where the Spearman family is? The people who died? Okay, straight back there, somewhere over there, is the graves for them. But they're like this. See how these things like this? That's a grave. But they're covered up, right? So you got to keep covering, taking it out and whatever, then you find out who the name is. Well, there's a, oh, I can't find it, so it's somewhere over there, okay? I just mention this because if you are going to have a tombstone here or any place, anywhere, doesn't even be in Shakopee, do not do like that because they're going to cover up. We had one in the Valley Cemetery. It was 8 inches deep that we found. It was Civil War bed. And it was only because we knew. What's that?
Haven't you had some that have fallen over?
Oh yeah, that's fine too. But then it's there and they can put it up. See how they have sometimes in the family say it's not. There's a part of it that's still up with it, with the kind of thing. It's not best. It's not the best way to do it. It's this, or this, or even further down. Because like this one, we only use one of those metal detector thing to find where it was, and then they dug down, and 8 inches we
So
found.
is that all like a certain time frame?
No, because people use it now even
choosing
too.
what they-
I, yes, because it takes more money probably. I'm just telling you, you're going to do this, you're not going to find it. That doesn't matter, but you know, just but think about that for the future. If that's just like my vision. I also would say, in terms of what kind of stone, look at the ones that work, that are still around, who don't have that stuff on it, you know, that you have to clean off. See those things over there? Oh, that's
Have them smooth.
yeah. That takes a lot, and you have to. You've been doing this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. You
So-
know, those ones in the ground, I've seen them now, where they have them, a little bigger, but then they have
A thing
concrete
around it,
around it, so it's gonna take longer to,
a little longer,
Yeah.
but it's still.
but it still isn't the best. But,
It really doesn't, you know, when you think about it, it doesn't really matter. But it does when, like, as I'm working on the graves down there for like 4 years, that thing, I'm like, I learned. Not doing that
yeah,
one.
you're cursing
Look
all
the
the
times.
And all you women, put your, if you years in your married name, put your maiden
Yes,
name
that's
on
the
it
other one.
too.
Always be smart, because believe me, and they often are married more than once. So that makes even more.
That makes
Come on,
it more.
put them all on there. We all know that. We need that. It helps. All right. So anyway, over there are the Bergens family. Okay. Here's Peter, and we have a picture of him. I have the cemetery stone thing. I just can't find it, but I know it's in the cemetery. Okay. And that's his wife, Elizabeth, and his father. They all moved here and shot to Shakopee. What's nice is they have pictures. So I was happy about that part. Okay. So Peter was born in Germany. His father, Nicholas, also, same thing. The mother was born there but died in 1860. And so when that happened, the three of them moved to America. Okay. He married Elizabeth Arndt. They got married in 1857 at St. Mark's Church in Shakopee. So they were here at that point. That makes me think that possibly the mother must be buried here too. But we haven't found that either. Okay. But the reason we talk about this one is because there was the Great Fire in Shakopee on October 2nd, 1879. I don't know if you are aware of it, but it was in downtown Shakopee on the north side of Home Street. Peter and Elizabeth building, which is across the alley on the west side. Okay. It was also a saloon. Okay. The fire started, according to the Shakopee story, which you have, okay, Julius Collar, it said it was a clear, warm, lazy fall day. The trees had lost most of their leaves. The Shakopee people were downtown, busy after lunch. At the Argus building, the editor was finishing the paper, was ready to go to press. All of a sudden, he could smell burning leaves wafting through the open window. Somebody yelled out, "Fire!" Okay? Now, William Hines, of course, he was a newspaper man, scribbled a few lines of paper, then looked out, saw the black smoke of fire coming towards his office building. So he hurried outside. On the corner there, which is now sports stop there.
Valley Sports.
Yes, Valley Sports. That before then, there was the National Hotel building. It was built in 1856, and here's actually a picture of what it looked like that time. And here's, of course, with Lorraine Collar, a little picture of it. But what we do know is that whole block on that side, north side, all got burned down. Okay? They said neighbors from around the fires would run to help, or they toss their buckets into the street for volunteers to fill with water and try to jump in the fire. They did not have fire department. Hello, right? Okay. And it ties into this to you in this. Okay, they said at the time the women worked as faithfully as the men, and the boys sandwiched in amongst them helped to remove articles of value from the burning buildings, the threatened stores, I should say. So they continued. So it's moving along the street. So start on the first building, move to the next place, which was the John Gutenberg um, place. That was where it was like a meat market there. And upstairs was an apartment. So the city meat market burned down to the ground. Now across the street is an H&R Block right now, but it used to be Coles and Barron's. Not the Coles like here, but Coles and Barron's. They moved all their stuff out because they said if it's going to come across, they don't want to stop it too. Next door was a saloon with an apartment in the rear. They continued there, continued southwards, and then it went across the alley to Peter Merger Buildings, which also was a saloon. And the whole place burned down. Now, just so you know, in Shakopee, the mayor called St. Paul Fire Department, and they got the lines, the train tracks to stop, and they put all the stuff on the train and head to Shakopee and help stop. And afterwards, they had a big party at the priest's house, I believe. I don't think it was that priest, but anyway, it's an interesting thing. So the west side of Home Street destroyed the entire block. But thanks from the St. Paul Fire Department, it never reached the rest of downtown. And it's also really interesting because the mayor asked asked St. Paul how much do we owe, because they did the thing, and they said they would do whatever for our. Isn't that kind of interesting?
Yeah.
So that the book talks about the whole thing in there too about that, but it's kind of an interesting thing. But the Mergens ended up wrecked their building. They ended up moving to near Marystown, where they farmed. Okay, and then of course Peter Mergens was at age 35. He joined the Civil War also. And of course, here's what it actually looked like. Them buried, but it's underground. We haven't found it yet. We've been looking. We know kind of about where it is. I think we looked. You kind of looked at stuff. We could find it, but I mean, it is there. So we just know that. So it's just kind of a good story about that. So that's the last of what we got for our Catholic cemetery.